Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Jeremy Utley joining us. Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, so Jeremy, you are the Director of Executive Education at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. You teach classes on disruptive innovation and design thinking. You're also a speaker, an author of the upcoming book, ideaflow, which we'll talk more about. I think the subtitle there is The Only Business Metric That Matters. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I am a prolific blogger. I've actually, just to show my thanks for being on the show today, I put together a free gift called How to Think Like Bezos and Jobs on our website. So if listeners want to check it out, it's ideaflow.design, and you can learn how to think like Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, or I suppose how to avoid that if that's something that you don't want to do.
There we go. All right, well, we'll get more into that here. I thought we'd start off, on your About page, you call yourself a recovering investment analyst and management consultant. So take us back to those days. Like what were those experiences all about? Why do you kind of position yourself or state that you are a recovering analyst and management consultant?
Yeah, it was a challenging time in my life because I think I'm sure a lot of folks can relate as well, because for a lot of us, ability starts to be the primary determinant of what we should do with our lives. So if I can do it, then I should do it. And, it could be a level of school, could be a level of organization, could be a type of work. I call it the Ricky Williams syndrome for the football player who was a phenomenal athlete. The problem was he was drained by playing football. He didn't enjoy it, and it didn't give him life. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. A lot of us who are kind of straight A, type A individuals, there's a very narrowly defined path for what being the smartest person looks like. And what I came to realize, of course, over the last 13 plus years of teaching at the D School is that we have permission to deviate from that path, but it requires changing a lot of the rules around what we believe about ourselves, what we believe is smart and intelligent. It kind of gets to the very core of the narrative we've been told about how to succeed in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful. And certainly, I think it applies, or people kind of see it at many different stages of their life. I remember, back in my kind of high school time, I was very involved in sports and was training 6 days a week in a track and field club, and just like woke up one day going, you know what? I don't actually love this. Like I'm spending so much time between the gym and training, but like I don't actually see myself doing this in the future. But you're right. I had, good kind of abilities in athletics. And so I just felt like that should be the path for me to go. Right. Do you see that popping up like a lot at different stages for people? Or I guess that's one question. And as well, like how do you suggest that people, if they are if that really resonates with them, how can they start to explore what they could do if they're in that situation, they want to kind of figure out like how can they escape or make some changes in their lives?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's especially true for folks coming into college. I was talking to a friend at South by Southwest, a few months back, and he was telling me he's on the scholarship panel for a Students of Color scholarship at, I think, UNC or one of the East Coast colleges there. And he was telling me how they were welcoming 100 new scholarship recipients to this kind of welcome dinner. And he said, the thing that struck me was they all knew what they were going to do with the rest of their lives. And I think that there's a lot of, we put a lot of stock in having a plan and knowing what the plan is. I talked to my friend Aisha, a former student, now the CEO and founder of Bossy Cosmetics, which is one of Oprah's 4 favorite products. And Aisha and I had this amazing conversation recently where she was telling me about how from her neighborhood, she grew up in Section 8 housing. And from her neighborhood, if you get into Harvard, you go, which that's great. If you can get into investment banking, then you do. And she kind of found herself on this, what she described as almost a soul crushing path because of the ability, if you're able, then you must. And she actually ended up in the hospital because of stress and all sorts of other factors at play there before she came to Stanford for a graduate program and rediscovered her love of color, among other things. It sounds very basic, but she ended up creating a cosmetics line that's all about empowering women and giving confidence. But that she only had permission to do that once she had kind of gone all the way, 20 plus years as a managing director of an investment bank. It took her a long time before
Mm.
she realized this isn't what I'm meant to do. And I see that. And if you kind of rewind all the way, it's because there's a very clear script that's been given from the beginning, what you should do and what success should look like. And so I think, having giving oneself permission to question some of those assumptions and question some of those shoulds. I have a friend who says don't should on yourself,
Yeah.
which I love, but question some of those shoulds, especially if they're coming from your community, especially if they're coming from folks around you, to really just question, is that the path that I'm meant to go down?
So what was your path back to your about page and calling yourself a recovering investment analyst and management consultant? How far did you go down that path, and what happened for you? Like, what was the trigger where you decided to maybe explore some changes in your life?
Yeah, I was studying finance. I worked as an investment analyst in the fund at my school at the University of Texas at Austin, Hookham. And, it was an interesting experience, nothing against the study of finance or anything like that. But for me, I found that every class I took, I thought, no, I hate this class more than any class I've ever taken. And then I get to the next level, I go, no.
Yeah.
And by the way, I was top of my class. I did really well, but enjoyment or interest actually was never even a variable. It's a multivariate equation. If the question is, should I blank, there's probably more than one variable at play. The question of enjoyment or interest was never even a consideration for me. Honestly, it was only, can I do it? And for me, I learned pretty quickly that I wasn't cut out for the investment banking world. So I did the next most, or maybe even, more significantly prestigious thing I could do, which was management consulting. And that job again it wasn't a fit for me. There were a couple of projects that I really was invigorated by and really enjoyed. And it takes two to tango, right? So there could have been, wrong attitudes and things like that in my mind. But I would say that for me, work, I just expected that I wouldn't enjoy work. It was about being excellent. I wanted to do things well, and do the best things that I could do well, choose those things. But there was no sense of enjoyment or sense of fulfillment or sense of purpose. And for me, my consulting firm had sent me to business school, and they had offered to come back. And so even though I knew I didn't like the job, I agreed to come back because it made a lot of sense. But the real gift there actually wasn't I ended up not going back. But the reason why is because I had a little bit of that safety net, so to speak. I was much more experimental with my summer internship.
Mm.
And what I ended up doing for the summer is I went to work at a startup in Delhi, India. And my wife and I moved to Delhi for 4 months. And it was an interesting experience. I mean, being in the developing world, I had thought long-term I wanted to be in economic development. So I had kind of clear selection criteria, and I was able to be much more experimental than many of my classmates, because so many of my classmates were putting all the burden of their career move on that summer. They wanted to get a foot in the door in order to, create a case for a change post business school. For me, because I already knew what I was going to do afterwards, supposedly, I was able to be much more experimental. And I ended up in India, and I was doing spreadsheets just like I was in America, just in a room that sometimes didn't have AC, and that often had a chaiwala coming in and offering me chai, which was great. But the gift there was that company, that startup, employed a designer. And the designer's office was next to my office, and I would hear him kind of, cutting away at stuff. And then he would be gone for a few days. And I'd say, Joe, where'd you go? He'd say, oh, I was in the slums. I was prototyping stuff with users. And I was so curious about what he did. How did he get to leave the spreadsheet, so to speak? It was clearly my world. And he said, when you go back to Stanford, you should really check out the D school. And I said, what's the D school? And he kind of told me about it. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like work, and I meant that as a criticism, really, in my mind, because why, if it's not hard, if it's not unenjoyable, then what business do we have doing it under the pretext of work, right? And so so I actually went to the design school after I came back from that summer in India. And it was a really bizarre experience for me because I had always equated rigor with work, and it was very rigorous, yet it was fun.
Mm,
And I had equated fun with not rigorous and not work. And I found over the course of this year, I ended up taking a lot of electives at the D school, and I found I really enjoyed the rigor of design work.
mm,
And it wasn't necessarily that I was good at it, or it certainly wasn't that it was easy, but I found myself wondering about it and thinking about it, even when I wasn't supposed to be working. And I found myself compelled to put in extra hours, even though I didn't have to, and on and on and on. Some of these key
sure. Yeah.
these key hallmarks of work worth doing. Um, and I realized at that time, there's a different way to approach work.
Yeah.
And I don't have to just do the job that I've been doing.
I think it's a great reminder, regardless of, for those that are listening in who are active consultants and running their businesses with teams, it's a good question for all of us to be considering and thinking about as well. So today, I mean, one of the things that you do is you run an accelerator at Stanford. You help ventures to launch.
That's
When
right.
you look at the businesses, the people that are most successful, are there any kind of particular traits or characteristics that you see that the successful ventures have?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it has nothing to do with the idea. It has a lot more to do with the founder's behavior. It's one of
Mm,
the key realizations that we made at Stanford is perhaps the most important thing we do is we're selecting for the right people. And how do we select everybody? You can't throw a rock at Stanford without hitting a wannabe entrepreneur. I mean that in an affectionate way, by the way.
right.
Um, but a lot of people want to start a company. Well, how do you know which of those people you should admit to the accelerator? And for us, one of the things that my co-author and partner in crime, Perry Claybon, and I figured out early on is we need to see how they behave. Specifically, we need to see what they do in the face of the unknown.
Mm,
Do they plan or do they act? And that simple question has profound implications for the likelihood of success of their venture, whatever the space may be. The
tell me
more
more about that.
likely,
Yeah.
yeah, the more likely an entrepreneur is to take some kind of action in order to learn, the more likely they are to be successful long term.
Makes sense.
And conversely, the more prone they are to planning or research, not in the academic sense, but in the stalling sense, the less likely they are to ultimately be successful. And I would say what's interesting is I've seen better businesses fail
Hmm.
because of a lack of experience. We would call that an experimental mindset, just crafting and executing scrappy experiments. I've seen really good businesses fail because it was a failure of experimentation on the part
Mm,
of the founders. And I've seen really bad businesses, objectively bad businesses, end up doing spectacularly well because of the founder's tendency to experiment. So for us, that's become kind of a key defining characteristic is they have a tendency toward rapid, scrappy experimentation.
hmm. So, I mean, Jeremy, this really resonates. And people in our communities hear me say the word imperfect action a lot. So we're very big believers in the best way to learn, the best way to get feedback is just to actually take action. That's how you'll learn. But what do you say? And I'm very interested in your perspective as you've worked with so many organizations and ventures kind of through this process and helping them, supporting them to actually take action. But to those that have that more perfectionist mindset or tend to be a little bit scared or afraid of venturing out into those kind of unknown waters without the plan or without all the research in place, like how do you counsel somebody in that position where they know they need to maybe pick up the phone and call more people or go to a trade show or send that email or follow up a bit more, or ask for a sale or make an offer, but they're not doing it because of something? What do you tell that person?
Well, it's really reframing the risk, right? The riskiest move is no move, and the
Mm,
riskiest action is inaction. And so it's just about kind of flipping the script. The reality is, whenever you're an entrepreneur, whenever you're launching a new venture, you've got a new idea. There's no way to prove whether it's going to work. And what managers love and what organizations love is the ability to deduce and to have data from which they can draw empirical decisions and empirical conclusions. For an entrepreneur, your experimentation is the means by which you create data. And the beautiful thing is you've got proprietary data. If you conduct a clever and simple and tightly scoped experiment, you've got proprietary data. There's a lot of talk in the world right now about big data, but I'm a big believer in small data, right? In actually creating not enormous data sets, but differentiated data sets that enable you to grow in conviction or lose conviction about a particular path to pursue.
On your website, and I quote, it says, "It is often said that success is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Ironically, teams tasked with growing business ventures often neglect the 1% that fuels the 99%. Can you talk a little bit more about that? When I saw that, it really kind of clicked with me, but I'd love to hear you kind of bring that to life.
Yeah, if you think about creativity and entrepreneurship and innovation, they're all kind of on the same continuum, if you will. Most people think in terms of output. And this kind of gets to the heart of one of the key principles of ideaflow. Most people associate creativity or entrepreneurship or innovation with output. And I think that's a mistake. I think that the important thing to consider is input. What are the inputs to your thinking? What are the ways of working and ways of acting and interacting that are likely to yield outputs over a period of time? And so I agree that whatever the quote is 99% perspiration, but you don't want to be perspiring without being inspired. Never perspire without inspiration, right? And so I would say that for a lot of, take myself again as an example, recovering MBA, so to speak, recovering financial analyst. When I met my wife, she was a fashion designer. And she was studying fashion design, rather. And in part of her studies, they would have these assignments to get inspiration to make things called mood boards and stuff like that. And, as far as I was concerned, having had experience in a bunch of different corporations through management consulting, my definition of inspiration was cheesy poster on the hallway that says teamwork or courage or trust, that's inspiration. But for a fashion designer, inspiration is this pursuit of input, this thoughtful, deliberate pursuit of input that fuels the practice. And she would go on these inspiration trips, whether it's to New York or Paris or the flea market, in search of something which she didn't really know what, but she knew it wasn't on her computer, it wasn't on her desk, it was out there. And that for me didn't really compute because I don't know how to code that into the pivot table I'm building in my Excel model, right? And yet over the course of, call it 12 years, 13 years now at the D school, I've seen how valuable inputs are. If you want to cultivate your imagination, you've got to be cultivating the input side of the equation. And that's what I mean by inspiration. That 1% is, what are you doing to seek out new input and to stimulate your thinking and to stimulate your imagination? And to bring the story full circle, for people like me who are highly analytical, who are highly linear, regimented in their thinking, inspiration isn't even on the radar, the tool set, really. I taught a class with a hip hop artist named Lecrae, and Lecrae and I were giving this assignment to our students. There's a bunch of MBAs, engineers, lawyers, etc. We're giving this assignment to go get inspiration in the world about a problem they were trying to solve. And I could see almost like through it was like a mirror image through a time warp. I was seeing the expressions on our students' faces that I made the first time my wife told me she had to go to New York for inspiration. It's like this very skeptical kind of look. And I, because Lecrae is obviously way more obviously the creative in the room. I'm like a closet creative. He's out in public creating. Right. And I said, Lecrae, do you have any thoughts on inspiration for our students? And as a true hip hop artist, he dropped a bar. He said, inspiration is a discipline. And to me, it was really a profound moment. That the topic had been on my mind for a long time, but the summation of it was nice because I realized for most of our students, it's not even on their radar, let alone a part of their routine. And so that, to me, coming full circle, when we talk about the 1% inspiration, it's the easy part to neglect because I
Right.
don't code it into my schedule. I'm not thoughtful about it. I'm not deliberate about it because it's way more ambiguous. It's way less clearly, there aren't as many KPIs on the inspiration part, but
Sure.
I can prove my perspiration,
Right.
and so we tend to manage what we measure. And for me, having inspiration on the radar as a key discipline to cultivate made it easier to measure.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I think very often people kind of equate and connect creativity with just kind of like going off and, just random acts or random insights. But so often what I've heard and from what I've studied, that the most successful kind of people who are known as creative people, they have very clear routines and habits that they become creative around, whether they're painters or writers or whatever. But like, they're not just kind of waking up going, let's be creative today. They actually have that regimen. So that's very interesting.
Right.
I want to ask you, Jeremy, you teach, before we get into talking about your book, you teach a course on lifestyle design.
That's right.
When you think about either the biggest mistake that you see in this area around lifestyle design, or just the big opportunity, where do people go wrong in this idea of lifestyle design? Is it like that they're not even thinking about how to design their lifestyle? Or like, just kind of give us, if there was, it's a whole course, but if there's just one or two big things that stand out in your mind as opportunities for people to focus more on, or to explore, or to think through, what would they be in connection to lifestyle design? Because I think everybody wants to have a more enjoyable lifestyle, or just to live a life that really connects to what they care about.
Yeah, I think everyone they want to put all their eggs in one basket, kind of. They want to make one bet that is the right answer. And they don't think that same attitude of experimentation that makes entrepreneurs successful, the same attitude around inspiration that makes creators successful, bringing those things into one's life and saying, I'm going to deploy or commission a portfolio of experiments. I'm going to try a few different things to get data. I'm going to do something on the side. I'm going to cultivate multiple interests. I'm going to have a portfolio of collaborators. A lot of people think, just like, because you can only go to one college. It's easy to think, well, I can have one employer.
Right.
I can have one boss. And we think, and by the way, your exposure from a financial analysis perspective, your exposure is enormous when you've made 100% bet. And now more than ever before, people don't have to make 100% bets, not even in school, right? I mean, and that's something we saw with the pandemic, well, like it or not, right or wrong. We saw students coming back frustrated that their teachers expected 100% engagement from them. And as teachers were like, what's the deal? You're in school. And they're like, dude, I started a company during the pandemic. And it's been an interesting thing to see, even at Stanford, even among students who are in grad programs, they're running businesses on the side. Whereas before, it's like your studies are all you do. And I think that's actually a little dangerous. I think it's a dangerous attitude. I think I'm putting all my eggs in that basket, and having a mechanism for experimentation and for commercialization, for testing the market about a bunch of ideas, I think is actually phenomenally useful. I'm reminded of my friend Minda Harts, who's written 3 now best-selling books, one called The Memo, and all of them are, generally speaking, Black and brown women's or girls' guides to having a seat at the table and finding their voice and things like that. She wrote a recent book for, as she calls it, it's the Black and Brown Girls' Guide to Finding Your Voice, I think. And it's called You Are More Than Magic. And she's, now a best-selling author. And you go, oh, wow, how'd that happen? Well, for her, she's working a job. She's experiencing various forms of bias and prejudice and things like that in her work. And she just started blogging. She started blogging on the side, and she just sent it to her family, just stories of her experience. And then she started hearing other stories, and she's still working her job, but now she's blogging. And then, things kind of snowball, right? And the point is, if she hadn't taken up that, call it a side project of just blogging, her career wouldn't have blossomed in front of her the way that it did. But if you think, it's really easy to think in terms of compartments. I got my work compartment, and once that's done, then I'm not working anymore. And I think there's some fluidity around, especially how you spend kind of your quote unquote non-working hours, especially when you're younger. Maybe you don't have as many constraints as far as family, obligations or responsibilities
Mhm.
are concerned. Thinking in terms of building a diverse portfolio of experiments of which your job is one,
Mhm.
or maybe it's a non-trivial percentage of your employment portfolio. That is, I think it's something that I wasn't thinking about for sure. Even when I was in a highly, demanding and lucrative consulting gig, I still had a clock out mentality. And when I was done, and I wasn't doing anything else. And I wasn't experimenting. I wasn't exploring. And I feel like that was a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, that's so, I think, interesting and powerful. When I look at my own life, so many of the biggest opportunities, or lessons or experiences came from just something, it maybe probably seemed quite small at that time, just like a little extra phone call, or deciding to go someplace that maybe I was wondering, should I go or not go? And I think probably all of us have these little kind of experiences in our own lives. And if we actually think about, what led or what came just before that big result or big outcome or great experience, it's probably just one of those things that kind of is connected to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've actually, one of the things that I do is I try to practice what I preach. I mean, I'm a work in progress. All the stuff in the book, all the stuff we're teaching students, or I'm trying to apply myself. And one of the things I mentioned is the power of, I mentioned this recently on my blog, the power of appreciating small breakthroughs.
Mm,
And actually, because there's something about, or even diagramming your last breakthrough. Think of the last time you had a breakthrough.
mhm.
What, as you just said, what preceded it? What were
Right.
the elements at play there? Because some people, I think for a lot of people, my joke is a breakthrough is more like a break-in, catches them off guard. And so they're like, where'd that come from? Right.
Yeah.
Well, how can we think about, how can we possibly conceive of perpetrating a breakthrough, committing a breakthrough, if we don't know what the environmental elements are? Right.
Right.
And so for me, what I've observed is, as I've been a little bit more diligent to appreciate some of those breakthrough moments, one happened the other day, we can talk about it if you want to, but I've found that I'm starting to kind of rewire some of my circuitry, and I'm starting to go, oh, hey, this is kind of like that. And what if I did that? And I'm
Yeah.
becoming more present and aware of opportunities that maybe I would have missed before.
Let's talk about your new book, Idea Flow. So where did the idea for Idea Flow come from?
I think it's a little bit of a response to a phenomenon that we've observed at Stanford for the last 12 years, which is the following. Most people, when they think of innovation, they think in terms of a sprint or a
Mm,
hackathon or a workshop. It's an event, it's episodic. And if it's something that you click into, it's also something you click out of, right? And what I feel it does a grave disservice to the practice of creativity and the practice of innovation, because the truth is, just like any other capacity, it's got to be built. It's got to be cultivated. Nobody would, taking piano playing as another capacity. Nobody would take an hour-long or a weekend-long workshop in piano and go, book the Carnegie Hall for me. I'm ready, or worse, which is something we see in the innovation space, put on their LinkedIn certified piano player. Um,
right. Yeah.
Nobody would take a swim lesson and ask to get dropped off in the ocean or even the river, or certainly not put on their LinkedIn certified
Mm,
swimmer. And yet, for whatever reason, whenever it comes to creativity, innovation, design, etc., we kind of badgeify it. And worse, that's fine. People are badging everything. That's okay. But worse, they're not thinking about, I got to play my scales. I got to
mm,
do my laps. And so for us, it was a little bit of we've seen too many people come to workshops and then at the end of it go, I'm done, did it. And what I want is for people to say, I've begun. Not I'm
mhm.
done, but I'm getting started. I've jump started this new practice. And then for me, just like I'm no longer a hygienic person if I stop showering. Doesn't matter how great of a shower I had, right? If you see me in 3 weeks, I'm like, dude, that shower I had when we talked was amazing. You're like, you stink. You're not a painter if you stop painting, and similarly, if you want to wear the badge of honor of innovator, tell me about your practice. Tell me
Yeah.
right now, what are you doing? How are you showing up? And so this idea of idea flow really came in response to this kind of workshop mentality, this episodic mentality is no, it's got to be a part of your life. And it's got to be a part of your team's culture if you want to routinely deliver breakthrough outcomes.
So the subtitle of the book, The Only Business Metric That Matters, very bold. So tell us how do you, what do you mean by that? How do you connect the idea or the concept of idea flow to business metrics or lifestyle metrics? How can people measure this area?
So in very simple terms, the single biggest determinant of how good your ideas are, do you know what it is? If you want to know what the biggest variable that has the most profound impact on the quality of your ideas is, it's the quantity of your ideas. So if you want better ideas, or if you want to say good ideas, what you should be focused on is not improving, it's more, it's volume. And so the reason that we say it's the only business metric that matters is ideas are the wellspring of all the future. Right now, the market is pricing a stock based on expected future earnings, right? I mean, not to trigger PTSD, but to go back into some of my DCF calculations, right? Everything about a stock's value, everything about a company's value is based on its future earnings. Upon what are future earnings built? Future ideas, future products, services, solutions, etc. And so if you want to know how successful are you going to be, just look at the source. It's that simple, right? Yeah. And so for us, when we say it's a business metric, I don't think anybody I've never seen a balance sheet that tracked the number of ideas an organization generated. Never seen it.
This really reminds me of Seth Godin wrote a blog post, I don't know how many years ago, where someone essentially said to him, like, how do you come with so many good ideas? And Seth said to this person, well, how many bad ideas, do you come up with? And they said, like, none. And he said, well, that's the problem. Like, in order to have good ideas, you have to have bad ideas. And so if you're not even trying to create or try to come up with ideas because you're worried about having bad ideas, then you're never going to get to a good idea. And that's what I'm hearing you say as well.
That's right. No, you can say ideas are like all natural phenomena, very simply put. Just like, if you want to know how tall is the average person, it's like it's a normal distribution, right? Things are normally distributed. Ideas are the same way. They're normally distributed, meaning what? There's a lot of average ones. There's a handful of genius ones, and there's a handful of goofy ones. And what you want is you want to put as much volume under that curve as possible. The danger is for a lot of people, they go, you know what? I love genius. Those are great. I want more genius. And I don't mind the average stuff, but I'm not really interested in the goofy. And what they do is they try to chop off the left-hand side of the distribution, but they chop off the right-hand side as well. And the reality is goofy is the price of genius. If you want to get to genius ideas, you've got to be willing not just to tolerate, but embrace goofy too. Not because you're going to implement something goofy, but because sometimes it's actually that suspension of disbelief that comes. We advocate practicing what we call a daily idea quota, where every single day you take any problem you're facing. How do I title this email subject line? How do I open this presentation? How do I give this piece of feedback? How should we, rejigger the, factory floor? Anything, not just new products and services, but any problem you're facing. And instead of trying to find the answer, generate 10. What I hear consistently, an executive in Singapore, she's a technology executive in Singapore. She told me the other day, my best ideas usually come after I tell myself to think of something illegal. And to me, that speaks to the value of variation. It's not that she's implementing illegal ideas, but there's something about when you lower your guard, you say, well, what can we do that's illegal? Maybe you think of something, you go, well, we can't do that, but what if we did this other thing, right? And it's giving yourself permission to not just say what's a permissible idea, but what are all the ideas that are possible? And by the way, 10's not all of them, not at all, but getting in that habit, that daily discipline of shifting orientation from the quality obsession to quantity focused it's what cognitive scientists call an interrupt. We introduce an interrupt. And there's a lot of research that suggests that it's called the Einstellung effect. It was established by Abraham Lutyens in 1942. And what Lutyens found is that if folks started solving a problem in a certain way, when they were presented with a problem of similar characteristics, they defaulted to a particular solution. And then he would present them with a problem that was actually could be solved much more simply, but they would still go through all the gyrations and hoops of the complicated version because they had kind of grown accustomed. And even more recently now, certainly since the 40s, researchers at Oxford have demonstrated with eye tracking technology and all sorts of things, when we identify a solution, not only do we stop the search for more solutions, even though we tell ourselves we're still searching, but furthermore, we're prevented from seeing better solutions.
Right.
And so as long as you think the answer is the idea, then you're stuck, right? And that's where, very few of the problems we're facing today are math problems, right? Math problems may have one right answer. And by the way, probably a good idea. I talked to a world famous technology leader last week at a conference. He was saying he grew up dyslexic. And because he often transposed numbers, he learned he had to do every math problem twice because he said if he got the same answer, he was confident that he got it right. But he did them in two different ways. And that's a great picture of how we should be. If it's true for math, which only has one right answer, how much more true is it for the problems we face where there's infinite numbers of answers? Why not try again? I got a solution. Okay, let's try another one. Let's see, right?
So Jeremy, let me ask you, you kind of opened the door here to take us a little bit more into the tactical realm, helping people to see how they could start to apply this. But let's take the consultant or the consulting firm owner, going back to your past in that world. Where do you feel there's an opportunity or what might be kind of a step or a framework or some kind of initial questions that the consultant or consulting firm owner could go through to be able to come up with better ideas? Like how could they apply what you're talking about into that type of business?
Well, there's a couple of different things that come immediately to mind. One is just, an A/B test. We often get students to do an A/B test, and they're very used to that, right? It's very kind of standard language. In industry, when we tell people to do an A/B test, the biggest surprise to the average professional, I've never had a B.
Right. Yeah.
And what would the application be
of an A/B test? Like when you say an A/B test, let's say in professional services, right? Yeah. When I think A/B test, I think people coming to a landing page and you split the traffic to the page. So one person is seeing one thing or another group is seeing something else. You do it with subject lines.
Yeah, you do a subject lines.
Yeah, right.
Take like you're going to have an event, right? And you're inviting people. Why not split your distribution list in half and have two different or better yet, split it in tenths and take a tenth of your list, try one line, a tenth, and try another line. And then whichever the better performing line is, give it to the other 80%, right? That's super simplistic. But the point is, I think for a lot of people, you think of the number of times you never even tried a second thing.
Right.
It's such a simple heuristic to say, what's our other idea? I know Astro Teller, the head of Google X. And one of the things he says is anytime a team comes to me with a solution, I ask them for 4 more. Bob McKim, who's a legendary professor at Stanford, he's since passed, but he's one of the founders of the design program at Stanford. Anytime a student asked him for feedback, he'd say, show me 3. And that instinct around quantity is just, we have such a default instinct towards quality. Right. And it's just, why not options? Is there any reason not to have options?
And Jeremy, we say is your recommendation to create options in pretty much everything that you do? So if you sending people an invitation to come to a webinar, right? You'd have different subject lines or slightly different hooks for that. Or if you're going to, I think a good one would be a proposal. You'd have different options, right? For the buyer to be able to choose from. Like, is there any place where people should not bring options in and not try and come up with multiple ideas? Or is this really across the board, and anything that you do have more than one consideration or more than one potential path?
I think anytime you don't know what the right answer is, you should have options. And then the corollary is And most of the time you don't know what the right answer is.
Right.
So
Right.
even, I mean, I'll give a simple example. The other day, I mean, we've got our house, we live here in California, our house faces west, which means the sun is always setting in our front door. We've always got grocery delivery at like the heat of the day, you know. So the ice cream's melting on the front porch, and there's kind of this five alarm fire, you know, like everybody stop, grab the groceries. And for me, it's a task. I'm contrasting tasks with problems, right? Problems, we don't know the answer. They yield to a volume of potential solutions. Tasks, we know the answer is straightforward. It's just a matter of execution. For
Mm.
me, the groceries, it's like I can carry, you know, depending on how many bags Amazon uses, I can get, you know, a couple bags in each hand, right? So it's like I've got capacity for 4 bags. We order however many orders a family. And for me, it's like, okay, when can I get this done? Well, that's just a task, and it's
Mhm.
annoying and it's irritating, whatever. The other day I came in, I was a little late to the alarm, and my 10-year-old daughter has laid a blanket on the floor. She's loaded 10 bags and her 2-year-old sister, and she's pulling them like a magic carpet through the house.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, that was a problem for her. It was just a task for me, right?
Yeah.
I had never even asked myself the question, could I do this better? Like
Mm.
never, you know, which, I mean, it's like such a silly and daily example, but it kind of perfectly illustrates the point. There are so many things that we presume we know the answer to. And if you just question even that premise, you go, why wouldn't I think of this? It's an interruption once a
Yeah.
week, every week of my life. Why would I not dedicate one daily idea quota? Just one. Say, what are 9 other ways to get the groceries inside? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love this concept. I think it's incredibly powerful and just full of opportunity for everybody to explore. So before we wrap up, Jeremy, just a couple of quick questions, and then want to make sure that people can learn more about your book and everything that you have going on.
Sure.
When you look at your kind of daily habits, your routines, what are 1 or 2 things that you do on a regular basis that you feel just kind of help you to be productive, focused, and to perform at a high level?
Well, I would say, interestingly, productive and perform at a high level are kind of at odds.
Tell
And I
me.
think
Okay.
that's part of the premise that I'm trying to question. Like, I've been studying creative geniuses, and
Mm,
what I've learned is genius isn't a little bit smarter than smart. Genius is altogether different from smart.
mm,
And productive is a great example of a word that is, everybody wants to be productive, right? It's an objective good,
mm.
efficiency, productivity, etc. And yet what I've observed is productivity comes with a cost. I can be very productive at solving problems and yet not solve the right problem, you know?
Yeah.
And
I think
so for
that's
me,
a really great point. Yeah.
one of the things that I mean, just practically speaking, that I try to bake in is I take, for example, 1 day a month, I
Mm,
call it a flight day, and it's blocked. I'm not allowed to use the computer. I'm not allowed to use my phone. I've got physical books. I have more physical books than anyone can read in a lifetime laying around that I still long to read. That's one example. Another example is once a week, I carve out time to talk with a founder or a
mm,
creator about their process, where instead of being the teacher, I become the student. One of the
mhm.
things I realized is, I mean, you speak to productive, and you said there was a series there. I can't remember the words
Yeah.
that you used, but
Focused as well. Yeah.
doing your best work, I think, was something
Mm,
like that. And for me, one of the things, I've actually got a post-it on my standing desk that says, never forget your job is 1, learn, and 2, share.
mm,
Because I'm a teacher, because I've been a teacher for so long, most people expect me to speak when I show up in a room.
mhm.
And if I'm not careful, every room that I show up in, I'm supposed to talk. And then the question becomes, well, at some point I start to dredge the bottom of the barrel, and I cease to be inspired.
Mm,
And I can't convey that which I do not possess. I
yeah.
can't inspire others if I'm not inspired myself. And so for me, carving out the time to be inspired, the time to take off the teacher hat and put on the student hat,
Mhm.
I feel is critical, right? It's unproductive in the sense that I don't get as much email done in a
Mm,
week. I don't
mhm.
get as many, course outlines
Sure.
done, right? And yet ultimately it's what enables my work to be long-term, sustainable, enjoyable, and vibrant.
What's a better word? Because I think, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I agree 100%. when I use the word productive in my mind, the way I think through it is it's the application of productivity in kind of an 80-20 sense. So it's not about the quantity of processing emails or just getting a lot of quote unquote stuff done. It's, as you said, like getting the right stuff done, things that just move whatever your goals are forward. So doing, real work that really moves the needle. What's a better word for that than productive?
I think effective.
Okay.
Is the word that I've been thinking. And I would contrast that with efficient.
Right.
Because, and I think that we're all efficiency oriented and we need to be more effectiveness oriented. And so, and I kind of put productivity in the efficiency camp, at least in my mind.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is, shifting or stretching my thinking. And here you are, right? You're putting on the teacher hat. So you before we wrap up, Jeremy, you mentioned books. I love books, right?
Yes.
You love books. We'll talk about your book in just a moment where people can learn more about that.
Sure.
But what are, one book that maybe you've read or listened to in the last 6 months, could be fiction or nonfiction, but just something that you absolutely enjoyed and would highly recommend that others explore?
I'm just looking at my bookshelf here. One that I really liked, Mark Randolph's book, That Will Never Work, the story of the founding of Netflix. Love that.
Okay.
One of the best startup books I've read in a long time.
All right, we'll link that up as well in the show notes. And then finally, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on. I want to make sure that people can learn more about ideaflow and just everything you have going on. Again, what's the best website for them to head over to?
Yeah. Check out ideaflow.design. And as I said at the head of the episode, I made, as a thanks to you, I made a free ebook available, How to Think Like Bezos and Jobs. It's not a recast of any of the book material, but it's related in the sense that those guys are breakthrough thinkers. And the thing is, it's not about being brilliant. There are practices that any of us can adopt in order to increase the effectiveness and likelihood of a breakthrough in our work. And so I've learned a ton from them, from observing innovators like them. So I put that together there on the website, but then ideaflow itself comes out October 25th. And it's a great summation of a lot of the lessons that we've learned and observations we've made leading executive programs and the accelerator at the D School for the last 13 years.
Fantastic. All right, Jeremy, thanks again so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.